Hello everyone, I'm Nick from nextstepnick.com and today we're going to talk a bit about Resident Evil 3. So we're going to talk a bit about the remake itself, but we're also going to talk a bit about Resistance, the multiplayer mode that comes with this. So we're going to talk about quite a few different elements. There are going to be a few spoilers in here. I've tried to keep the gameplay itself spoilers out because I know a lot of people will want to see gameplay for the first time, whereas talking about stuff is a bit different. I will be showing a few things you can unlock from the end of the game very shortly though. So like your unlockable characters and a few bits like that, including some concept art, because I've got a bit of a point about the concept art. So if that does bother you, bear that in mind. I'll also put a timestamp on this video about here, so you can see exactly where to skip to if you just want to see about Resistance, which won't have any of these spoilers in. So bear that in mind, and other than that, we'll just go through it, see what we like, what we dislike, and what I think is good and bad about Resident Evil 3 Remake. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Also, if you do, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I know it's a silly thing to call out, but it really helps out, especially at these times if you're making small things. I appreciate making stuff for you guys, and if you like it, let me know. Simple as that. Anyway, without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about Resident Evil 3. Now, first thing to address is the length of the game. I know quite a few people have said that the length of the game doesn't really warrant the price. And to be honest, there are a lot of challenges and reasons to replay the games. The Resident Evil games are very much about replayability. It's that point of going back into a scenario with some unlocked stuff, finding out a quicker way to do things, getting those speed runs down pat. And the unlockables are quite fun to make those kind of things more possible. You can unlock guns with infinite ammo, you can unlock coins that give you more damage, you can unlock items like key items earlier, and you can also see a lot of concept art about things like that and models. And I like that. I think there's enough here to warrant multiple playthroughs. That being said, it also kind of highlights what I'm not that keen on about this game. I think the art itself is fantastic. I think the models and all of those things show off how brilliant this team is, how much they're capable of doing. So that's why I'm a little bit sad that they haven't fully indulged in this. When you look at the artwork here of some of the places you're seeing, it looks amazing. I love the idea of these streets dotted with zombies where you're trying to survive. This survival horror element of going up to these interesting buildings, exploring them, looking at things. One of my favourite things about Resident Evil 3 was the flavour text when you looked at different items, and that's just not really here. The movies themselves allow you to get a little bit of an element of this. Like when you start off originally at the start of the game and you're in Jill's apartment, there's a lot of things to look at, but again, you can only examine maybe 2 or 3. And I would like this to indulge the Silent Hill aspect a little bit more, that old Resident Evil aspect where you look at different posters and Jill makes a little comment about how that fits into the world or what the relevance of that is. Because there's some really interesting stuff to look at. Even when you look at things like in Jill's apartment, when you look on the fridge, there's a lot of different references to things that are really great in universe mentions. And they're really sweet. But I'd like to see her indulge these a little bit more and say a bit more about them. Instead, a lot of the time, you don't hear anymore. Same thing with the Nemesis, really. He chases you around, but he doesn't feel as all-encompassing as he used to. He's not this constant looming threat. He just appears from time to time and chases you through like much more of a linear sequence, and then disappears for a bit and then comes back. He's not a looming threat that could ever pop up at a random time. He appears at scripted times, he does certain things, and then he disappears again. And that's a shame, because I feel like the Mr. X presence in Resident Evil 2 was a little bit unnerving, and it could be frustrating, but at the same time it kept things random, it kept playthroughs different. Whereas with this, the first playthrough, the second playthrough, the third playthrough, they're all kind of the same. It's a shame really, because when you look at the world, especially during the introductory part of the game where you're walking through and you're talking to people like Brad, it looks like this vibrant, interesting, unique place that's still very much alive. It's Bioshock Infinite rather than Bioshock, if you know what I mean by that. The world is crumbling around us, and we're arriving as it happens. We're not there just for the aftermath. Whereas for the majority of the game, you don't really interact with anyone else. You've got a couple of characters that pop up. I mean, obviously you're indulging things with Carlos, you see him because he's one of the main characters. But even there, the relationship between him and Jill seems rushed. And I'd like more time to really get to know the world, to explore the shops, to look around these environments and be encouraged to look about. But none of the challenges really relate to this. None of the information is really, you can't comment on it or do anything with it. And there's some really nice little nods to pop culture and other things. But they're just kind of, yeah, they're there at the introduction and it feels like as the game goes on they just slowly disappear. It's like the streets themselves. I'd love them to be more eerie, more spooky, more unnerving, but in reality it feels a lot more like an A to B to C kind of game. Don't get me wrong, When you get introduced to the zombies at the start of the game, it's really unnerving. You're being overwhelmed, you have to run. But most of the time in the game, it's very easy to wipe out everything that's a threat in the area really easily, and then you can just run around. And there's no real reason to look about, and there's no zombies spawning in random areas or anything like that. It's all kind of scripted. It doesn't feel like the world is alive. You can't hear survivors screaming, and in the old games that was a big deal. You could hear someone scream and the glass would break in a different room, and then you'd run in just as it had happened, so you'd see like the immediate aftermath. But in this, I think there's one scream. There's one scream at the very start of the game where you hear someone scream and then that's it. For the most part, you don't see civilians or anything like that. I think the introduction was probably the strongest part of the game, where you first meet the Nemesis and you start seeing civilians running and hiding. I mean, I remember this guy from the original game, and I remember you could go back through here later and there would just be silence, and it was that eeriness of, well, has he got out, or has something happened in this crate, or what's going on? But in reality, you see him now, you never see him again. And that happens a lot. You just go from one area to the next area to the next area. Don't get me wrong, I know that happened with the original game to an extent, but it was far more padded out than this. There was a lot more to explore and look at. Puzzles, for example, were more complicated, but in this game, you pretty much get to a certain point, Nemesis will appear, for example, he'll bar the way, you won't go back to that area again. If you do, you're just running through it and he's chasing you. There's no reason to explore. And it was so promising as a start because you see these survivors running and hiding in all these different places. It never comes into play. You never see survivors wrestling with zombies. You never see military or anything like that trying to do anything. It's usually just a couple of zombies, maybe 2 or 3, and then you move on. I mean, don't get me wrong, you can backtrack to an extent and there are certain items you'll need. So for example, at one point you need to break through a door. So you need to go and find some lockpicks to pick those locks. And there are a couple of those locks dotted around here and there, but there's no real reason to look at stuff. There's no flavour text. There's no introduction to these places. There's no characters that Jill really recognises. There's one, but it feels more like an action game than a horror game, and that's a shame. Especially when you look at some of the cutscenes and the lead up to this. They're done really, really well, and they really introduce Umbrella as this really unnerving, overarching force, especially when you know that Jill is already aware of the kind of dark things they're doing in the background. So it'd be really interesting to see her interact a bit more, for example, with Carlos, or to interact more with the people around her, but instead, you just don't really. The cutscenes are fantastic, and the likeness is brilliant. The characterisation of the characters is really, really good, and I really like that. They've done a great job in regard to the storytelling, but at the same time, it feels quite rushed. I mean, without going too deeply into spoilers, and bear in mind, like I said, there will be a couple in here, later on, you will have a bit of a go as Carlos, and Carlos's chapters, they're very much Last Action Hero-esque. Like, you're running through, you've got a counter as Jill, where if you're just about to get caught and you press it at the right time, you can kind of active dodge. Time will slow down and you'll have this chance to get like a headshot, for example, or to go for a special shot. Time will slow a bit. As Carlos, it's a full-on punch, like a straight-armed punch. So something will come at you, he will straight-arm punch it away, and it feels very... it kind of loses that horror touch, and it's a shame because a lot of these cutscenes really set up these eerie characters. I mean, when you first meet Nikolai here, he's so intense, and you're genuinely quite unnerved by him. And it's a shame. The world itself is pretty nice, there's a lot to look at, but again, it doesn't feel vibrant or ever like it's been lived in is the problem, I think. It's more like set dressing. I think that's the problem I've got, is that this world doesn't feel like it existed before this outbreak. It feels like it's here for you to have a nice clean path. And the puzzles that used to be in the game aren't really here. I mean, most of the time it's find the key to open the door, or find the MacGuffin to open the door. If it's not a key, then it will be some lockpicks. If it's not some lockpicks, then it will be a bolt car. There's never any interesting puzzles. All the clock tower elements that original gamers will know, they're gone. The only thing that's anywhere similar is at the very start there's an optional puzzle where you can put some crystals into a little dais and then get something back. I think that's where my main critique lies, is that I really like this game when it's building the world, and I really like when it's introducing things, but as it goes on, it just feels like it's very much a game. It doesn't feel like you're exploring a world and you're going to accidentally go down a dead end and get trapped, and you're going to really have to struggle against these odds, and you're clinging to ammunition and you've barely got enough. Most of the time, you've got loads. I mean, fair enough, in the footage you're seeing here I'm using the unlimited pistol that I unlocked, but for the most part with Jill, I never really struggled, and when it got to Carlos, because of the fact that he had a machine gun with loads of bullets, he just feels quite weak. it feels like he's not doing that much damage. Like I say, I'm not going to include gameplay of that here because, you know, it's worth playing, it's worth having a go, and for the most part, I did enjoy this. I had fun with it. But to put it in perspective in regard to the play times, I finished this once, it took me 6 hours and I was taking my time. I was actually looking for things and exploring a bit. I finished it a second time, going for a bit of a speed run. I finished it in 2 hours. It's okay, it's fun, and it's definitely worth playing. But is it worth the price tag when we've got so many good games coming out at the moment? When you compare it, for example, to Resident Evil 2, I don't think it is. And it's a shame, because I do like it, and it's a good game on its own. But I think that's the problem that Capcom has with this, is that you had such a strong year and such a strong game in Resident Evil 2. This just doesn't live up to that. It's good, just wait for a sale, I would say. Hello everyone, now we're going to talk a little bit about Resident Evil Resistance. If you've been with me for the whole of Resident Evil 3, thanks very much. If not, welcome, let's have a bit of a chat about it. So, primarily, you're playing as 2 different factions in this. You're either playing as the solo Mastermind, that's the bad guy that's trying to kill the second group, the survivors. So you're either one of 4 survivors or the Mastermind. The Mastermind is doing things like you can see here, turning off lights, monitoring the cameras to make sure that there are zombies to jump the survivors, that doors are locked, that traps are set, basically giving them a hard time. The ideal thing is that there's a timer that runs down whilst you play. You're trying to stop them from getting away before the time expires. If the time expires, they all die. If the time doesn't expire and they get away, they win. There's 4 different stages, 3 or 4 different stages for each different level. It's okay. The survivors are punished for when they get injured. They're punished for when they make mistakes and do bad things or get hurt. They're also punished if they die. So if you die straight away and you've got like an unlucky moment where you get caught by something, that's fine because you do come back to life, but your whole team suffers a time penalty when you die. So it can get quite tense and it's kind of fun. I really liked it. I did enjoy what I played of it, but I've got some complaints about it. And I think, to be honest, a few people are going to say, okay, as soon as they hear a certain word come out of my mouth, but we're going to wait until a little bit later because I think we should talk about the game on its own at first. Talking about the survivors first, you've got a few characters to pick from. Each one has a unique ability that they can use and also a sub-ability that makes it easier for them to get away. So some have abilities that can, for example, increase their damage with melee weapons. Some have got the ability, like Martin here, to put down a mine that will catch super weapons, and also it will also capture other zombies as well. So there's like a shock trap. If zombies walk over it, they'll be penalised or killed. And also if the super weapons that I mentioned earlier, that's like Mr. X and things like that, walk over it, it will stun them and give you a chance to get away. Others have the ability, for example, to freeze cameras, because primarily the way the Mastermind works is by using cameras to place traps and zombies. And you can also upgrade different aspects of their gear and unlock different things. There's cosmetics as well, where you can change the way they look and the way they dress and things like that. And it's quite nice. I like the idea of this multiplayer. I like the idea of 4 versus 1 multiplayer, but I feel like it's a little bit problematic because everyone wants to be the Mastermind, let's be honest. That's kind of the cool angle to be. That being said, the gameplay as the survivors is pretty fun. I'm going to be honest, you don't usually do very well. This is one of the playthroughs I had where we won. We actually managed to succeed, so props to this team, wherever you are in the world. But what will happen is you're making your way through each different area, finding key items to open doors, then going back, opening that door, moving on to the next area, and then going from there. It's very reminiscent in a way of one of my favourite Resident Evil games, which is Resident Evil Outbreak, and I really want to see them remastered, I'm not going to lie. I think that they were a little bit too early when they were released because online functionality wasn't really a thing, but now I think it would do amazingly well to have that in there, and maybe an aspect of this in there. Maybe this could be a test for something like that. But anyway, what you're doing is finding key items, finding items around the level as well that can increase your damage, increase your health, protect your team, and also give you more of a chance to get away, as a timer slowly counts down that goes down when you're injured and goes up when you succeed. It's literally that simple. You've got to stay together because it's very much Left 4 Dead-esque. If you get caught by certain things, you can't get away unless a teammate helps you. And then what you're doing is breaking down doors to find items, whilst also avoiding traps. There are like floor traps and things. There's also zombie dogs, zombies. There's special super weapons that can come out as well. It can all get a little bit intense, to be honest. But it is very fun, especially if you've got a good team. That being said, if you've not got a great team and people aren't communicating effectively, when one person dies, you all lose time. When the time runs out, you lose completely. And that can be a real problem. If one person gets stuck, or for example, if they disconnect and go AFK, and there's a few seconds of them being alive when they're killed, you get a massive time drop for that. You know, you lose a lot of time, and it makes it a lot more difficult. Likewise, if you're fighting against someone who's really placing traps effectively, you're done for. You're done for. There's stuff to find in the levels as well, like credits that you can use to unlock things, but there's also stuff like ammo, new weapons. You can buy different weapons whenever you get through one stage. So when you clear stage 1, you get through, you can buy new weapons in like a safe room and then move on again. And that's really useful because later on, you actually have to defend certain areas and wait for counters to go down in order to get away. That can be really, really tough. You've got to really use all your abilities and work together to win. Meanwhile, the Mastermind is going out of their way to stop you. It's a really nice dynamic because it does lead to some really tense gameplay. It does make you really anxious. There were a couple of points where I was sitting forwards just shouting, come on, whilst playing this. And that's a good sign. That's a good sign. That kind of anxiety is nice. But at the same time, there are a few little gripes, and I think it's way more difficult for the survivors because I think the Mastermind isn't hobbled correctly, and also the survivors themselves. Yeah, if you struggle with a good team, then you're going to do badly. Now, you'll probably be seeing this screen now, seeing the layout of how we did, where you get your rank. You'll also see something that's RP boost, and shared RP boost, and your points, and your rank. And I bet you a lot of you are guessing now what the problem I might have is. Yep. Now, I'm not going to say it yet. We'll get to it. I'm going to tease you with it because we're going to talk a bit about the Mastermind. So Mastermind-wise, you're controlling cameras to place down zombies, zombie dogs and traps. Ideally, you can kind of control cameras across the whole map, and you want to be doing that on the side of doors they're going to break through. But you can also spawn monsters directly in front of the survivors. They just come out of the floor, which kind of detracts a little bit. I'd like it more, to be honest, if you had more time to really plan where your zombies went before the survivors started pouring out of the safe room. But you don't. You literally get thrown in the second they start as well. So a lot of the time you're just placing zombies directly behind people, or literally directly in front of them sometimes. And that kind of detracts a bit. Another thing that kind of wrecks it a little bit is that you can literally turn your cameras into a gun. So right now, for example, I'm just shooting a survivor with a gun, which seems a bit cheap and unfair. It's not really adding into that whole idea of setting traps. You can take control of zombies, and you can also boost their stats with stuff like boosters that make them stronger in combat. But to be honest, I would never take control of them. They handle so badly. They're really, really slow, really, really clunky, as you would imagine. And also, they just tend to miss. You know, if you go for a grapple and you miss, then you're done. Other than that, you've got these cards that basically allow you to use these abilities. Like, each card is a different enemy or a different thing. And you have to use your energy, which you'll see on the bottom left there, to kind of justify what you're spending. Certain cards are more expensive than others. That being said, if you get the right combinations and you just spam, you tend to do alright. You're not really punished for doing badly, and it's very easy to choke the survivors into a point where they can't get away from you. You also get the super weapons, which, my god, if you summon your super weapon in the right place, you've just won. That's the end of that. There's no argument there, you've just won. Likewise, if you trap one survivor on their own and the team's not working together, they're going to lose. And that's it, really, because everyone has to be in the extraction point. Even if a teammate is down, you can't leave without them. So a lot of the time people will have to come back for teammates that are down but haven't died yet. So, yeah, it can be a bit frustrating, I can imagine, for the survivors. I didn't find it too frustrating because I had good teams for the most part, but I feel like the Mastermind element should be much more about planning rather than just being reactive. You should really be proactive and being allowed to set things and get ready, rather than just, you know, hobbling people, dropping stuff directly in front of them and then just spamming the super weapon, crippling them into a corner, and that's it. I'd like more of a chance to go around the map, maybe for 5 minutes or 3 minutes whilst they're readying up, to set traps up and set things up in certain places and move key items around. But instead you're not really doing that, you're just very much spamming stuff around and trying to move as quickly as the survivors can. They can literally, if they're quick enough, sprint so fast that you're left changing cameras, trying to keep up, and you can't really. So that's a shame. It doesn't feel like you're a Mastermind so much as you're just trying to solve a problem. It doesn't feel like you're testing these survivors. It feels more like you're just flailing around by the seat of your pants, hoping to do the best you can with what you've got. I'd like it to be much more planning orientated. I'd like, for example, to be able to set where some of these objects are, maybe make our own sort of custom maps to an extent with certain presets. I know there's not a lot of freedom there, but even a little bit, just a little bit of freedom to create your own map would be nice, just to sort of move people in a certain way, as long as you're not putting stuff literally blocking pathways. It would be nice to have that element, to plan this map before they start, and then soup zombies up and add little bits in and maybe drop your super weapon in later on, but rather than dropping everything on the fly whilst everyone's running around, it can feel a bit hectic, and it's not always good hectic. Likewise, like I say, the super weapon is very, very strong. You can knock enemies down really, really fast. You've got certain grapples, for example, where you'll grab someone. If they can't get away from you whilst they're in that grab, so like if a teammate doesn't help them, you literally just kill them. So for example, when you're playing as Birkin here, I grab the survivors by the head using the overkill ability. Literally, people are running into me, shooting me at points to try and stop me. They can't. I just grab a survivor by the head and just keep bashing them into the ground till they die, and then they die, and that's literally it. So it doesn't feel very fair, I suppose. And you feel powerful, but you also feel like this is a bit cheap. I'd much rather it be that you can hide a zombie and you can say when you want them to pop out. So for example, you know, they're checking lockers and you've hidden a zombie in a locker, but there's also a foot trap. So the second they open the locker, they're trapped and the zombie falls on them. But instead it's very much a case of you can spawn bombs underneath people whilst they're running around, and that feels a bit cheap. It's fun, it's good. It could do with a little bit of growth and a little bit more in regard to thought processes, especially when you think about how long the queues are as well to be the Mastermind, because you will be waiting a long time. But at the same time, I think there's definitely legs on this. The thing I think they need to stop with as well, you guessed it earlier, you probably noticed it here, there's RP boosters. That means you can level up faster. You level up faster, you unlock, for example, more people to play as when it comes to the bad guys, so you can use different super weapons as you level up. The best way to level up is to use these boosters, and guess what? Those boosters you can unlock them, but you can also buy them. So you can buy those boosters in the store, on the PlayStation Store. That means obviously that for the most part, people are going to do that, I would imagine. I don't really like it, and especially with some of the things you can unlock here. You unlock a lot of stuff that basically increases the way you can play and the way you can beat people. It gives you direct gameplay advantages, and you can pay real money to get those boosters to basically level up faster and get more of these. So there are loot boxes in it. You can't buy them outright at this point in time, but that doesn't mean you can't in the near future. And like I say, you can basically get more RP by using these boosters to level up faster, to get more stuff, and they just give you gameplay advantages, and I always think that's a bit of a negative. It's a shame that you can't buy things straight out with just RP, just literally pick out what you want and buy it. And like I say, these aren't buyable at the moment, but I'm sure they will pop up as buyable extras in the near future, especially after this has gone out of the point where people are reviewing it. It's a shame, and I think it mires a really good project in something that's a little bit dirty, so I hope they look into this and change this a bit. But it has got legs. Definitely give it a go when you get a chance. Anyway, thank you very much for tuning in, guys. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and hopefully I'll catch you again very, very soon.